Music by Durruti Column here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, soldier suicides are on the rise in America. In June alone, at least 32 active duty and reserve officers took their own lives, the highest monthly figure since record-keeping began. Meanwhile, a new U.S. Army report has found that the rate of suicide by soldiers in the Army has risen above the civilian rate for the first time since the Vietnam War. In 2009, 160 soldiers committed suicide. Another 146 died by other violent means, such as murder, drug abuse, or reckless driving while drunk. Another 1,700 attempted suicide. The report faulted commanders for ignoring rising mental health, drug, and crime issues among soldiers. 1/3 of soldiers take at least one prescription drug, and 14% are on some form of powerful painkiller. President Obama briefly addressed the issue of soldier suicides and post-traumatic stress syndrome, or PTSD, in a speech on Monday at the Disabled American Veterans National Convention in Atlanta.
And as so many of you know, PTSD is a pain like no other. The nightmares that keep coming back, the rage that strikes suddenly, the hopelessness that's led too many of our troops and veterans to take their own lives. So today I want to say in very personal terms to anyone who is struggling, don't suffer in silence. It's not a sign of weakness to reach out for support. It's a sign of strength. Your country needs you. We are here for you. We are here to help you stand tall. Don't give up. Reach out. We're making major investments in awareness, outreach, and suicide prevention, hiring more mental health professionals, improving care and treatment. For those of you suffering from PTSD, we're making it a whole lot easier to qualify for VA benefits. From now on, if a VA doctor confirms a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, that is enough, no matter what war you served in.
But the families of soldiers who took their own lives say President Obama's words ring hollow. Today, we talked to the parents of 2 soldiers who committed suicide. Even though their sons died in the military, they've yet to receive condolence letters from the president. Not because of an oversight, but because of a long-standing U.S. policy to deny presidential condolence letters to families of soldiers who've committed suicide. Gregg Keesling was among the first to raise awareness of this issue. He's the father of Chancellor Keesling, a U.S. soldier who took his own life June 19, 2009, on his second tour of duty in Iraq. During his first deployment, Chancellor suffered mental health issues so severe he was placed on suicide watch. After getting back to the United States, Chance turned down a bonus offer to return to Iraq in the hopes that he wouldn't be redeployed and could get his life together. But he was called back in May. 1 month later, he committed suicide in Iraq. Gregg Keesling joins us from Indianapolis. And joining us also from Chicopee, Massachusetts, are Kevin and Joyce Lucey. Their son, Jeff Lucey, took his own life June 22, 2004, after returning home from military duty in Iraq. Just a month earlier, Kevin and Joyce Lucey had Jeff involuntarily committed to a VA hospital. But the hospital discharged him after a few days. 2 weeks later, Kevin Lucey came home to find his son hanging from a hose in the cellar. Lying on his bed were the dog tags of 2 unarmed Iraqi prisoners Jeffrey had said he was forced to shoot. The Luceys sued the VA for negligence, and the U.S. government settled the case for $350,000. The Luceys are now plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit against Prudential that claims the insurance giant cheated the families of dead soldiers out of more than $100 million in interest on their life insurance policies. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! And I don't think giving condolences, even though it is 6 years later and 1 year later, we can ever give too many because of the sorrow of losing your child. Gregg, I want to begin with you in Indianapolis. We spoke to you several times, along with your wife, about Chancellor and about the fact that you have not gotten a letter of condolence from President Obama. What were your thoughts as he gave that speech to the disabled veterans of America?
Well, I think the most important thing is that when he says that it is not a sign of weakness to seek help, but for a soldier who does not get that help and does succumb to his illness, it is a sign of weakness. The president considers it a sign of weakness because he will not write a letter of condolence. So I think it's hypocritical to say, seek help. It's not a sign of weakness when it's still it's acknowledged as a sign of weakness by the fact they will not acknowledge the family left behind.
Quickly, if you might, if you could tell us, we described briefly, but about your son, about Chancellor Keesling.
Chancellor Keesling was a good soldier. He signed up for the military, the Army, in 2003 when he was 18 years old. He was still in high school. He was caught up with the patriotic fervor that was going on after 9/11, and he wanted to serve his country. His first deployment, he was married. His marriage broke up, and that was a very traumatic experience for him, and he decided to leave the military. And he decided the war in Iraq was not what he thought it was going to be when he signed up in 2003. But he was a good soldier. The investigation into his death showed that he was the head of physical training for his unit. They all loved him. They were completely shocked and taken off guard that he died this way. His unit just got back in April, and Chance was the only soldier who died with the 961st Engineering Brigade.
And the problems that he encountered during his first deployment and being put on a suicide watch, what the discussions that you had with him after his first deployment and when his state of mind and the things that he was going through, if you could talk about that.
Well, I think when he came home, he began to get very healthy again. His marriage had broken up, and he began to move on with his life. But I think he had made a decision that the Army was not for him any longer, and he wanted to get into civilian life. But of course, when you sign up for a 4-year enlistment in the Army, it includes a 4-year commitment to the reserves. So he turned down a bonus to be deployed earlier because they needed soldiers, and because he said he did not want to go back and was not prepared to go back. And when he finally got the call to return, we had great discussions about whether other options that he could use. We even talked with him about going, and because he was working with the VA and going to his commanders and going to his leaders and saying, you know, I've got this mental health issue, I can't go back. But Chance told us that it would be a complete waste of time to do that because they would think he was just trying to fake it to get out of being deployed back to Iraq. And I think that that's really the issue, is the pressures that our troops are under from these multiple deployments that they've had in these 2 long wars that our country is engaged in.
I want to turn now to the Luceys. Kevin Lucey, son. We're joined right now by Kevin and Joyce Lucey. Their son, Jeff Lucey, hanged himself June 22nd, 2004. Before we get to the issue of the condolence letter, first, your response to President Obama's speech.
Well, I agree with Greg. I think that it's hypocritical. How can a person advocate that everybody should go running seeking mental health when the stigma in the military has been so prolonged that you don't do that because that's a sign of weakness? But the other thing is the hypocrisy. I mean, I think that the soldiers are going to be looking at the behavior of the president as opposed to the words of the president. And if he will not extend condolences and acknowledge the suffering of the families, because these are from hidden wounds, then I'm sorry, but I don't put any weight on what the president has said in this matter.
And Joyce Lucey, if you could tell us about your son and what he shared with you about his experiences in the war.
Well, Jeffrey signed with the Marines right from college, and he was involved in the initial invasion in March of 2003. And when he returned in July, and he seemed fine. By the following spring, he started what would be a spiral, downhill spiral, and he started talking about what happened over in Iraq. Bits and pieces of what he went through over there. Then there was I mean, it's kind of hard to go through everything that he was saying because, again, it was in bits and pieces about Nazaria, about how he felt. I think a lot was noted in the letters that he sent back in to his girlfriend in April of 2003, in which he said he felt he did immoral things and that he never wanted to be involved in a war again. And I don't think at the time that Jeffrey was going through all this in the following 11 months that he came home, I don't think we realized how bad this whole situation is. We never thought it was going to be something that would be lethal. So I think that was one thing that we learned. We learned that PTSD is not something that is just something that just goes through. I'm sorry, I can't even think right now. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, what Joyce said, I believe
Let me ask Kevin on the issue of you bringing him to the hospital to be involuntarily committed. Can you talk about that experience? Also, the experience of his grandfather trying to bring him back to the hospital.
I think when we decided to try to bring him to the hospital, we had been trying to negotiate with him for over a month. We had actually hired a therapist to be able to help us get him into the hospital. On Friday, May 28th, 2004, the beginning of the Memorial Day weekend, Jeff finally went to the hospital. He had no intention of staying, and they did say that he needed to stay. And so finally we did an involuntary commitment. It took about 6 hours to do it. During the 3.5 days that he spent there, we thought that he was being assessed for PTSD and assessed for treatment. But regretfully, they didn't assess him. What they stated was that he had to be detoxed and they were just trying to detox him. And then he was going to have to stay sober, completely substance-free, for a period of 3 to 6 months. And I looked at them, and in this age of dual diagnosis, I couldn't understand how they could even say that, because I went with the naive belief that the VA were the experts in regards to PTSD. Despite Jeff divulging how he had bought a hose to kill himself, they had plans. What happened is that they ended up discharging Jeff 3.5 days later. 2 days after that, Jeff got into a single car accident, totaled our family car. He was unscathed, and he saved the 2 coffees they went to get for his mother and for himself. And then that weekend we tried to bring him back because it had gotten much more severe. And the VA, they didn't even bother calling a person who had the authority to enter him involuntarily. And he just came back home. And at that point, I was furious. I lost